system. How do you know what to put in there? Well, take a look at the front label of the hard disk drive. It should list parameters for cylinders, heads, and sectors per track. However, if you have the auto option, just go with that. It's so much easier. Now, another thing you might need to do is configure the CPU. Again, this depends on the motherboard that you've purchased. Right here I have an option called CPU configuration. If I hit enter, notice that it automatically detected the type of CPU that I have installed in the system. I have a 2.5 gigahertz Pentium 4 CPU. My motherboard was smart enough to be able to go out and query the CPU and find out what its parameters are. What kind of CPU is it? What frequency does it run at? What's its multiplier rate? On other motherboards, you may have to manually enter this information. If you do, look at your motherboard documentation, look at your CPU documentation, and you'll be able to come up with the correct parameters to use for the given CPU. Now, another thing you might need to do is come over here and determine which video adapter we're going to use. Now remember, on this motherboard I already had an onboard AGP video board that was built into the motherboard, but I said I don't want to use it because they generally don't perform as well as the one that's installed in a slot. So what I need to do here is make sure that this option is set to auto. If I select it right here, it's going to ignore the AGP board that I installed and use the onboard one. If I set it to auto, it will default to the board that's installed in the expansion slot. Now you can also configure your onboard devices. What I need to do here is to configure the serial ports. This one is currently set to use IO address 3F8 and use IRQ4. That works just fine. This parallel port is configured to use IO address 378, and it's set to use a mode called ECP. There's many different modes you can configure your parallel ports. We're not going to go into them right here. If you have a particular device connected to your parallel port, such as a scanner or a printer or even a parallel hard drive, check the documentation and see which mode it recommends. We're going to stick with ECP for now. Now, I'm not worried about my game port or my MIDI port, so I'm going to leave those disabled. Here's my parallel port IRQ. I could change that if I wanted to, but I'm going to leave it at 7. I want my network adapter enabled, so I'm going to leave that on. And I also want my soundboard enabled, so I'm going to leave that on as well. Another thing we need to look at is the boot settings. In other words, what device do we want to boot the system from? You can boot the system from a floppy disk, you can boot it from the hard drive, or you can boot it from the CD-ROM drive. Now notice right here we're set to boot from the floppy disk first, from the hard disk second, and from the CD-ROM drive third. Now there's a little bit of a problem here. We need to install an operating system. We're going to install Windows XP, in fact. The problem is the fact that in order to do that, we need to boot off of the CD drive, or the DVD drive. Now, with this ordering set the way it is, the system will hit the floppy drive first, then it's going to hit the hard disk drive and probably kick up an error saying, I can't find an operating system, before it ever tries going to the DVD drive. So to fix that, I'm going to come down here, and I'm going to press the minus key. It says the minus key right here, change option. Okay, so I moved my DVD drive up to the top of the list. Okay, so now it's going to look for boot files on the DVD before it looks on the floppy and the hard disk, and I do want that. So I'm going to press escape, and now I have made all the changes that I need. I'm ready to go ahead and save my changes. That's done using the F10 key right here, save and exit. That will write this information to the chip that we call the CMOS chip. So I'm going to press F10. We're going to save our changes, and we're off and running. With the BIOS configured, we are almost ready. The next thing we do is partition the hard disk drive and install an operating system. Now, this is a mistake that's made by many folks, especially when they're reading their system and adding a new hard disk to the...
They do everything right. They set the master-slave relationship, they plug in, put the driving system, turn it on, and assuming an operating system, they boot it up and they say, where's my new drive? All I see in the drive, where's the new D drive that I just installed? Well, the mistake they made was that they didn't partition and format the hard disk drive. Now, when you're installing the operating system for a new hard drive, it's not as big an issue because the installation for Windows and Linux and most other operating systems give you the opportunity to format and partition the drive before install on it. We'll look at how to do that in just a minute. Before we do that, let's talk about what a partition. A partition is a logical division on the hard disk drive. You could make 1, 2, 3, or different partitions on your hard disk drive. Now, operating system, each of those partitions is going to look like a separate drive. So if I took a single hard disk drive and on it, I would have a C drive if I'm running Windows, and I would have a D drive. Now, with each partition you create, you must format it. Now, the process of it is dependent upon the operating system. If you're going to be running Windows, you're going to format it using one type of file system. If you're going to be using Linux or some other operating system, you're going to need to format your partitions using a type of file system. What it does is create a file allocation table, and it also creates the root directory. With that in mind, let's talk about the role operating system. What you need to understand is that applications that you run on your computer have no idea how to interact with the various hardware components. The role of your operating system is to sit between the hardware of your PC and the applications that you want to run. In essence, the operating system provides a platform or an interface for the applications to run. Let's get how we go installing Windows XP. What I have done is placed my Windows XP Home Edition CD in my DVD drive. Remember, when we configured our BIOS, we configured it to boot off of the DVD drive first. I powered the system on, and it booted off of our Windows XP Home CD. And that brought us to this screen, the Welcome to Setup screen. It says to set up Windows now, press Enter. So we're going to go ahead and press Enter. And then we have our licensing agreement. Please understand that software vendors make their money and their ability to continue to produce software based on the fact that people pay for it. So I would strongly encourage you to read the Windows XP licensing agreement and obey it. I'm going to press F8 to agree to the licensing agreement. Now I need to partition and format my drive. Notice down under Windows XP Home Edition Setup it says unpartitioned space on disk 0 on our IDE controller. I want to create a partition in the unpartitioned space. To do that, I'm going to press the letter C. So I press C and it says create a new partition using all the space. I'm just going to press Enter. Now notice that a new partition, partition 1, drive C, has been created. I want to install Windows XP in the selected partition, so I'm going to press Enter. And then we're given various options for formatting that partition. We can format the partition using the NTFS file system, or we can format the system using the FAT file system. FAT is much older, it's not nearly as powerful, it doesn't use things such as permissions. We want all the features provided by NTFS, so I'm going to go ahead and arrow to format the partition using the NTFS file system, and then I'm going to press Enter. Now we wait for a few minutes while that partition we just created is formatted. And by the way, when you're doing this at home, especially with a very large hard disk drive, the formatting process takes a long time. Okay, the partition has been formatted. Now if you look at the bottom of the screen, you see a message that says creating a list of files to be copied. Windows XP for the next few minutes will copy the files it needs from the CD over to the new partition on our hard disk drive. So we're going to wait while that happens. Now we have to restart the computer. When it does, it will restart in Windows mode. Okay, our system is restarted. It's booting up. Notice we're now in the Windows graphical environment instead of the text-based environment that we were before. We'll wait just a minute for everything to load. Now notice over here on the left side of the screen is kind of a progress indicator telling you where you are in the installation process. We started collecting information, updating, preparing the installation. We're now at the installing Windows phase. Notice down here it tells us approximately how long it will take
to complete the installation. In this case, we have about 39 minutes left. Alright, we're at the regional and language options screen. By default, Windows XP uses United States English for its installation language. In addition, it uses the US standard keyboard layout. If you need to change any of these, you can click Customize here or Details here. For what we're doing, the defaults work really well. They probably will for you too. So I'm going to hit Next. Now you need to type in your name and your organization. Put my organization as the company I work for. I'll go ahead and hit Next. Then we need to enter our product key. When I purchased this copy of Windows XP, I received a product key on my Certificate of Authority. I'm going to type that in here. Now, I'm going to type in the wrong one because Microsoft would be really upset with me if I were giving out a legitimate product key. So I'm going to type in the wrong one, stop the camera, put in the right one, and then start up again. TT4. And then I hit Next. At this point, we need to set up our computer's name. I would suggest using something that's fairly descriptive. I'm going to set this computer's name to Build Your Own Computer Demo. And then I'll hit Next. I check and make sure that the current date and the current time are correct. And then I need to set my time zone. We're located in the Mountain Time Zone. And then I'm going to select Next. In this screen, we can configure our networking settings. We're going to go with typical settings for now. And I'll hit Next. Alright, our Windows XP Home operating system is installed. It's ready for you to install your favorite applications and get to work. Excellent. We have a running PC system with an operating system. We have built our own PC. You can now go in your bathroom, look at yourself in the mirror and say, man, am I cool or what? I built my own PC. I want you to understand what a valuable skill this is. You can do anything you want with this skill. You could build your own PCs. You could build PCs for friends. I've known people that have built PCs for profit. They've started small businesses building PCs and selling them to customers. You can do that. Before we can finish up, there's one more thing we need to talk about, and that's the concept of burn-in. Now, usually, 99.9% of the experience, PC components work very well together. Even though you bought your motherboard from one vendor and your CPU from a different vendor and all your boards from a variety of other vendors, everything seems to plug in and work pretty well. However, there are occasions, and I had this happen a year ago, where something just isn't right. The system boots up and everything seems to run, but then you start noticing little flakinesses in the system. In my case, it was a bad motherboard. What you need to do is run what's called a burn-in test. Now, there's many different types of burn-in tests. You can actually purchase software that will run a full-bore burn-in test and actually stress the components in your PC to identify anything that might fail first. If you're building PCs professionally to sell to people, you probably should do that because you want to be absolutely sure that those components aren't going to fail on your customers. I think you'll find that building your own PC is just a lot of fun, and you get a great sense of satisfaction from using something you made with your own two hands. Thank you for joining us in this video. If you would like to learn more, please visit http://www.nebo-tech.com on the internet and see what other offerings we have available. About every month or so, you'll see a new title posted. Thanks again, and good building!